Hello, my name is Mike Sherwood-Smith. I'm going to introduce the series on modelling the mind. You will have noticed it's a series which has 8 parts to it. This one will be very short. The other episodes will be somewhat longer, and in the course of which I will hope to be able to give you a feeling, a sense of how the mind is organised and how it functions at a very basic level. So the final episode will be called The Big Picture. But before we get to the big picture, we have to get through some of the details. And I'll try and make it as simple as possible. Right, so let's crack on. Well, you know where the brain is. It's in your skull, sitting there quite happily, hopefully. It's a piece of flesh, meat, of enormous complexity. It has billions upon billions of neurons, and they're all interconnected. So the trillions of synapses represent how the brain is organised. And we still have a very long way to go before we can unearth exactly the precise details of how all that fits together. But matters are not right at the beginning. We have started off and already developed technology for mapping the activity of the brain in ways which are quite astounding, really. But it is still early days, and we have a long way to go. But as I have indicated, this is not about the brain. This series is about the mind, and the question is, where is my mind? And the quick answer is, it can't be located anywhere. The only thing we can point to is the brain. So the mind is an abstraction, if you like. One way of describing it is a network of interconnecting systems. The same could be said of the brain, although mapping the systems is a very difficult business and would involve a great deal of detail. But at the level that we call the mind, it is possible. And I'm going to use the analogy of a metro system like you see in a tube station in London, the iconic underground map of London, where the tunnels are all stylized and presented in nice geometric patterns, nothing like the real tunnels underneath the earth and that part of it which is above earth. So what we're going to do is really look at the mind as a network of interconnecting systems with a considerable deal of simplification when compared with the brain. The brain, if you like, could be treated as though it were a computer, a piece of hardware, machinery. But people are very uneasy when you compare the brain to a computer, because of course the brain does not run along the same lines as a digital computer. It's a biological entity, and it runs according to biological principles. But nevertheless, I think the analogy between software and hardware is quite helpful, at least in an introduction. So, if you like, the brain is the hardware, whereas the mind is the software. It's the organisation behind the brain, and it's not the physical organisation, but the functional organisation. Which brings me to the matter of neuro-worship. The popular press especially is particularly interested in focusing on the latest discoveries that neuroscientists have been making, and there's a general feeling that if you're a neuroscientist you must know everything about how human beings work. But of course I'd like to quickly correct that impression. The brain is not the mind, and if the word neuro has become dangerously close to guru, we have to be rather careful not to assume that knowledge of the the intricate machinery of the brain will tell you anything about the mind. Neuroscientists usually know something or sometimes even a lot about the mind as well, but their expertise is focused on the physical machinery. So this series is indeed about the mind, and if you want to worship anything, I suggest you worship the mind. At least that's what we'll be doing in this particular series, although I wouldn't like to use the word worship. Admiration is perhaps better. Okay, so with that I will conclude just with the observation that this perspective is the one chosen by John Truscott and myself. John Truscott is a psychologist who is also an expert in language, and I'm a linguist interested in psychology, and we've developed this perspective over the last 20 years. I mustn't exaggerate. Over 20 years, and it's really not necessary for you to know much about the Modular Cognition Framework for the purposes of this series. Those of you who are interested might like to look at the website, but it really isn't necessary. I would just like it if you could just follow the series and see what you think by the end of it, when I wrap it up in my last episode, which is called my last presentation, which is called The Big Picture. So with that, I hope that you'll be joining me for the next session, which will be on perception, on sensory perception, and more specifically about the knowledge system that we build by virtue of the 5 senses that we have, sending us raw signals from the environment, and with our minds trying to make sense of it and building particular kinds of knowledge, visual knowledge, auditory knowledge, according to the system that I'm going to present to you. So with that, I'll say goodbye, and I hope that you will follow the series and enjoy it, and do leave comments if you can.